Imagine a number so vast, it defies belief. Over 300 young girls, their lives stolen by one man, Pedro López. It's a figure that's almost impossible to grasp, a tragedy that stretches far beyond what most of us can even imagine. His confirmed victims stand at 110, but the real total is likely much higher, making him one of history's most prolific killers. Authorities believe the true number may never be known, lost to time and the vastness of the Andean wilderness. How could one person cause such devastation? The question still haunts entire nations, leaving families searching for answers that may never come. López's crimes weren't just statistics. They were children, daughters, sisters, each with dreams and families. Each loss left a hole in a community, a wound that never truly healed. He preyed on the most vulnerable, girls aged 8 to 12 from poor indigenous communities, luring them with gifts or promises. These were children who trusted easily, living in places where safety was taken for granted. Moving like a phantom through South America, he hid in plain sight, exploiting a world without digital records or DNA databases. In an era before modern technology, he slipped through the cracks again and again. In the vast landscapes of Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, each disappearance seemed isolated. No one imagined they were all connected. The sheer scale of the region made it easy for him to vanish after every crime. The monster of the Andes became a name whispered in terror, but even that fails to capture the cold, methodical nature of his evil. His crimes were calculated, his movements deliberate. He operated in daylight, using a friendly face as his deadliest weapon. He was the stranger no one suspected, the man who seemed harmless, until it was too late. And the most chilling fact? Even after his confession and leading police to mass graves, the story doesn't end with justice. The pain and uncertainty linger, as many families never found closure. It ends with a question mark, a shadow that lingers to this day. The horror of his crimes still echoes through the mountains and villages. The scale of his crimes is almost beyond comprehension. Each file, each photograph is a life cut short, a story unfinished. This is the story of a continent haunted by a single man, a legacy of fear, sorrow, and unanswered questions that may never fade. To understand the monster he became, we must first look at the child he once was and the world that shaped him. Pedro López's early life in Colombia was marked by crushing poverty, neglect, and relentless abuse. He grew up in a world where survival was a daily struggle, and love was a foreign concept. Abandoned by his mother after being caught in an inappropriate act, he was left to fend for himself on the unforgiving streets, with no guidance or protection. There, he endured further abuse at the hands of strangers and older children, learning quickly that the world was cold, predatory, and indifferent to his pain. His teenage years were spent drifting in and out of institutions, places meant for safety, but which only sharpened his cunning and deepened his rage and isolation. While imprisoned for theft, he claimed to have been assaulted by inmates, a trauma he would later twist into a motive for his own future violence, fueling a growing darkness within him. Upon release, any trace of empathy was gone. He saw vulnerability not as something to protect, but as something to exploit and dominate. The abused child had become the abuser, setting the stage for a reign of terror that would go unnoticed for years as he moved through society's shadows. His story is not an excuse, but a chilling origin for one of history's most notorious killers, a reminder of how monsters are sometimes made, not born. The cycle of violence had come full circle, repeating itself in ever more horrifying ways, and soon, the world would pay the price for the darkness that had been allowed to grow unchecked. López's killing spree spanned Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru, thousands of miles of rugged terrain. He drifted from town to town, targeting markets and bus stations where young girls could vanish without a trace. Disguised as a salesman or tourist, he lured children with small gifts, exploiting poverty and trust. Once he gained their confidence, he led them to secluded places, leaving no witnesses. The 1970s in South America were chaotic, borders were porous, and police communication was almost non-existent. López exploited this fragmentation, adapting his identity and story as he moved. He targeted indigenous girls, believing they were more trusting, a chilling testament to his calculated cruelty. For over a decade, he was a perfect predator, blending in and leaving only whispers behind. His methods were simple but terrifyingly effective. The continent lived in fear, unaware that a single man was behind so much loss. How did López remain undetected for so long? The answer lies in both his cunning and the failures of the era. In the 1970s, South American law enforcement was overwhelmed by political unrest and lacked resources. Disappearances of poor indigenous children were rarely prioritized or connected. There were no national databases or shared records. Each town was isolated. López crossed borders freely, resetting his identity with each move. He was quiet, unremarkable, and avoided attention. His anonymity was his greatest weapon. Even when arrested for rape, he served only a short sentence before being released. Authorities failed to see the pattern, missing every opportunity to stop him. Each bureaucratic blind spot allowed him to continue his hunt. The system's failures became his camouflage, and so the monster thrived in the shadows. After a decade of terror, López finally slipped. The man who had haunted the shadows for years made a single, crucial mistake that would change everything. In 1980, in Ambato, Ecuador, he tried to abduct a girl from a bustling market. But this time, her mother saw and raised the alarm, her desperate cries echoing through the crowd. Vendors and bystanders rushed to help, intervening with courage and determination, trapping López until police arrived to take him away. At first, he seemed like just another petty criminal. But during questioning, something changed. He began to confess, his demeanor eerily calm. With chilling composure, he described the murders of over 100 girls in Ecuador alone, recounting his methods and even providing details about burial sites that only the killer could know. Investigators were stunned. Was he delusional, or was this truly the monster they'd been hunting for so long? The scale of his confession was almost unimaginable. His confession linked years of isolated tragedies, connecting the dots and revealing the true, horrifying scale of his crimes across the region. The arrest was a turning point, ending his reign of terror, at least for the moment. For the first time, hope flickered among the families of the missing. The mask was off, and the world finally saw the face of the monster of the Andes, a man whose crimes defied belief. But the nightmare was far from over. The truth was only beginning to surface, and the pain was still raw. His capture brought relief, but also new horrors, as families learned the fate of their loved ones and the extent of his evil. The investigation was just beginning. Detectives now faced the daunting task of piecing together years of evidence and searching for answers. Justice, however, would prove elusive. The legal system struggled to keep up with the magnitude of his crimes. The story was about to take an even darker turn, as the world braced for what would come next. With López's confession, Ecuadorian police faced a grim task, verifying his claims. He led them to mass graves, calmly pointing out burial sites. Dozens of remains were unearthed, confirming the unimaginable scale of his crimes. In one grave alone, over 50 victims were found. The news shocked the nation and forced neighboring countries to re-examine their own missing children cases. Forensic limitations made identification difficult, but the evidence was undeniable. López seemed to relish the attention, providing chilling details only the killer could know. He spoke of his victims with disturbing detachment, seeing them as trophies. The investigation exposed not just his depravity, but also the inadequacy of the legal system. The truth was out, but justice would prove elusive. The world watched in horror as the case unfolded. The legal system was about to be tested and found wanting. The aftermath would shock everyone. With overwhelming evidence, the world expected López to be locked away forever. But Ecuador's legal system was unprepared for such evil. In 1983, he was convicted for only a handful of murders, the strongest cases. The maximum sentence? Just 16 years. Public outrage erupted. How could a mass murderer serve so little time? The law had never anticipated a criminal like López. After serving his sentence, he was released for good behavior and deported to Colombia. The system had followed the letter of the law and set a monster free. His case exposed massive flaws and forced legal reforms across South America. But for the families, it was a devastating betrayal. The monster was free again. Deported to Colombia, López was briefly evaluated in a psychiatric hospital, then released, and then he vanished. One of history's worst serial killers simply disappeared, leaving authorities and families in agony. No manhunt, no international alert, he slipped back into the shadows. Did he change his name, move to a remote village, or cross another border? No one knows. As of today, his whereabouts remain a mystery. The fear is that he never stopped killing. Interpol still has a warrant for a murder committed after his release. Rumors and sightings have surfaced, but none confirmed. The thought that he could still be out there is a chilling, unresolved nightmare. The story ends not with closure, but with a haunting silence. The case of Pedro López left a scar on South America's conscience and forced long overdue reforms. It exposed the dangers of fragmented law enforcement and the vulnerability of the poor and unprotected. López's story is a warning about the consequences of systemic failure. His name became synonymous with evil, but his victims were real children, each a universe of lost potential. The silence about his fate is a wound that never heals for the families left behind. The world must remember these stories, not just for their horror, but for the lessons they teach. We must remain vigilant, demand accountability, and never stop seeking answers. The darkness of the monster of the Andes is a reminder: justice is not guaranteed. If you want to explore more stories like this, subscribe and join us as we seek to understand the shadows that shape our world. The story of Pedro López is not over. It's a question that still demands an answer.